Hi everyone, I thought today we'd talk a little bit about hand quilting. It's one of my favourite things to do. I find it incredibly relaxing and it makes for a beautiful, snuggly, gorgeous quilt. So I thought we'd just cover a few things, basting, the batting I like, how I mark up my quilt top ready for quilting. So we can start with marking. If I'm going to be doing straight lines, I just usually use a Hera marker and my rotary cutting ruler. So that little sharp edge on the Hera marker, just run along the side of your rotary cutting ruler, makes for a nice dint in your fabric that you can follow. If I'm going to be drawing on my quilt top, I just use my lead pencil. I use this for lots and lots of things. A soft lead, so we call it a 2B, different parts of the world will call it a different thing, but a soft lead in your pencil. And then if the lead doesn't show up on fabric, I tend to use a Soline pencil. They come with lots of different coloured leads, so you can always find something that is going to show. Both these I love because they wash away, so I'm always happy. And just remember, whenever you're marking or using any sort of pen for marking, you are marking on the front of your quilt, so try not to be too heavy-handed with your lines. Just keep them as faint as you possibly can so that you can see them, but then you know that that is not going to be problematic when you finish the quilting. If I'm marking with something like, this is just a little Baptist fan ruler that we made because I love the Baptist fan. It's a traditional old pattern. It looks so amazing over top of any quilt design, and I love to use this. So we made a little Baptist fan ruler, and sometimes people see the packaging and don't really understand how it works, so I thought I would just quickly run over that for you. You need an awl or something really sharp to hold the ruler in one corner, and then you take your pencil. What we have here is a set of little holes. These ones on this side of the ruler are 1 inch apart. On this side of the ruler, they're 3/4 of an inch. So you can choose the distance that you want your blades of your fan, how far apart you want them. And then you just pop your pencil in and it will you take your rule around, and what it does is it just marks the fan on your quilt top. All right, so it's that simple. Then you would just move this across and then start the next one. And you would just mark across and mark your entire pattern on your quilt top. I do this before it's basted. It's much easier if you're drawing lines to do it when it's just a flimsy, before you've basted your quilt top. If you're using the Hera marker or any of these things, I do it after I've basted my quilt top, because that then gives you a little bit more, just the softness of the batting gives you something to make that little mark with the Hera marker. And they're the two main ways that I mark up a quilt. Annie made up this beautiful sample last night for me so that I can show you how I would mark with the Hera marker, and then we'll do a little bit of stitching on it. So I love if I've got sort of something like this where it's squares joined together. Cross hatching looks fantastic on something like this, and especially in a contrast thread. So what I would probably do, if this was my piece, I would stitch this with a charcoal thread. I would quilt this with a charcoal thread. Everybody chooses thread colours for different reasons. You might want a thread colour that blends and you don't really see your stitches, or you might choose a thread colour that's going to stand out and be a little bit more punchy. And there is no right or wrong. It is really all personal preference about the look that you want for your quilt. So I will just talk a little bit about basting. I love to baste my quilt. I use this micro stitch tagging gun. It's so easy to do. You can baste a quilt in about 35-40 minutes. And the other thing I love about it is that it adds no weight to your quilt, as safety pins and things do, and your thread doesn't get tangled around it. So it's a really easy tool to use. It just has these tiny, short little tags. So they hold the layers of your quilt together perfectly You just make sure that that's engaged and pop it through your layers. Fire it off. I'll do it on this lighter piece of fabric so that you can see. And those little tags will just hold all your layers together. The more basting you do, it holds your layers together better. I don't use a hoop for quilting, I lap quilt, and so I love to put quite a bit of basting in, because then I know that my layers are a little bit better tensioned. So you could put one in every square if you wanted to. Up to you. But that's how I baste my quilts. Of course, if you don't have one of these tagging guns, a curved safety pin is a really good option for basting your quilt top together. So I'll just go ahead and finish basting this, and then we'll come back and talk about the stitch. So we've done the basting, and now I'm going to quilt this with a charcoal thread, which I love. This is a 12 weight thread, and I'm going to use a chenille 26 needle with this. With your threads, anything that is on a spool, you thread your needle from this end and cut this end, because all thread is made up of short fibres that are twisted. So if you were to thread your needle on this end, and every time you drag it through the fabric, you're pulling on those ends of the short fibres, and you're going to make your thread really rough, and it's going to tangle and knot on you. So thread your needle this end, cut this end, and don't cut too long. Sort of probably about somewhere like that length is pretty good. And now we'll just thread our needle, and then we're ready to start stitching. Now I'm just going to tie a knot in the end of my thread. I like to bury my knots in the batting so that they're not visible. I do it all from the front of my work so that I can see what I'm doing. And normally, if I was quilting a large project, I would start quilting right in the very centre and quilt out towards the edge of the project. That way you can move any little bubble or wrinkle that may appear in either your quilt top or your quilt back. You can just work that out to the outer edge of your quilt. On a small project like this, you're not going to bother with that. You're going to start somewhere and just quilt across. I just thought this would be good because it's squares. We could just cross hatch in each direction. I would just use the ruler and the Hera marker and find the centre and just draw my creases in like so. All right, and that just gives that little indentation in the fabric that I can follow. Now the other thing you could do too is just quilt ever so slightly just outside the hexagon pieces, which would tend to make them pop a little bit. Now your batting of choice is very important here, because every batting that you pick has a different stitch rate distance. So if you did not want to quilt on top of that hexagon, you would have to make sure that your batting allowed you to leave that distance without any quilting stitches. All right. So a batting like a quilter's dream, or the majority of hand quilting battings will be 3.5 to 4 inches. Quilter's dream are 6 to 8. So that's a great batting choice if you're wanting to leave, say, an applique piece without any quilting on it. You could choose that batting. I'm just going to show you on one of these straight lines that I've drawn here. So what I do is I pop my needle into the batting, give it a little wiggle around, pop it out where I'm going to start stitching. Take it so that the knot, just pull it gently so that the knot is at the surface of your fabric, and then just tug gently so that the fibres in the fabric will part and your knot will slip in. All right. If you pull it too hard, you'll either break the thread, or you might just tear a little fibre in the fabric. If your tail's too long, you can just give it a little trim. And then what I do, if there's a little bit still visible, I just put my needle in and just sort of catch it and pull it into the underside like so. All right, and then we're going to start quilting. Now I pop this finger, I like to be able to feel when my needle comes through the fabric, through all 3 layers. So I use my index finger underneath to feel that I've got that happening. As I lay the needle down to take that first stitch, I can feel I'm through the layers. I lay the needle down to take that first stitch. As I do that, I will push up with the index finger that's underneath the needle, and at the same time with my thumb that's in front, I'm going to pull the fabric down, all right? So the motion is one like this, up with the finger, down with the thumb. So that sort of motion is the motion that I'm going to use so that the needle will just pop up out of the fabric, and that's my first stitch taken. I'll take all the tension off, stand my needle up, feel with my index finger that I'm through all the layers, lay it down, up with my finger, down with my thumb, and push that needle through. Now you can stack several stitches on your needle at a time. Everyone's a little different like that. I'll probably do 3 or 4. Some people may just do 2. It doesn't matter. And you find your rhythm. And what you're aiming for is that the stitch and the gap will be even. It doesn't really matter how long your stitches are, so long as you can't catch your big toe in it, it's okay. But you're wanting to get the stitch and the gap fairly even. As I go, I will just clip those little tags by slipping the point of my scissor in underneath the tag, elevate it so that it's away from the quilt surface, and just snip. And we're just going to keep stitching. Now I do like to wear a thimble because it helps to push the needle through, and this little finger grip, it's just a little silicone thimble on my index finger, works as a needle grip to pull. Alright, and that's all there is to hand quilting. It's actually a really lovely thing to do. I'll put a couple more stitches in. I'll stitch to the end of this row and then I'll show you how to finish it off. So I'm just at the end of the row and I want to finish my thread, and so this is the method. I mean, you're looking at this saying it's in the seam allowance, you could finish it anyway, but if you're finishing in the center of your quilt, this is just a nice neat way to do it. I just make a loop. I bring my needle up into the center of that loop so that I've tied a knot on the thread, and now I just pop my needle into that loop and run it down so that I run the knot all the way to the surface of the quilt. Right, and then I just pull the thread to one side and pop the needle right back in exactly the same hole in the fabric that your thread is coming out of. And just take it up along the line of your quilting. So just take your needle up along the line of the quilting. Oops, sorry. And then just gently give that a few little tugs, and that knot will just pop back in. The hole in your thread, in your fabric will just close over, and then you can just trim that, clip that thread close to the surface of your fabric, and it's all nice and neat and tidy. So I'll clear the table and we'll lay down some of my hand quilted quilts so that you can see some of the things that I've stitched. So this one was quilted with a charcoal thread. This is Wensleydale, that is in my quilt recipes book, and it is quilted with a charcoal thread, and I just did really simple crossing through the blocks and around. Has Quilter's Dream batting in it so I can leave larger areas unquilted. So that's just a contrast thread across the quilt. This one is Wanderer's Wife, and I've just echoed all the blocks here. So just, you know, where there's a triangle, I've quilted a triangle, a square, echoed the seam lines in a log cabin or courthouse step block, and then these little filler strips that run all the way through the quilt, I have literally just quilted down the center of them. So that's one that I would say where most of the block design has been the inspiration for the quilting design. As far as quilting designs go, I usually have a fairly good idea. As soon as I've got the quilt, I have finished or the blocks sewn together, I just have a look and think what do I think will enhance that design. And sometimes I'll do curves on curves. Sometimes I like to do curves on straight, or just look. Honestly, you can do absolutely anything you want. You could do a cable and run it all the way down every row of blocks. There are no rules as far as, so long as you know the distance that you have to have your stitches, you can quilt any design you like. Everything could just be cross-hatched and then back in the opposite direction. It doesn't matter, you can do anything you want. But this one's halo, and so I just did a circle in the centre, a circle. This gap was too large to leave unquilted, so I've just echoed the square in the centre there. So they're all, that's sort of three fairly simple designs. This one over here is green tea and sweet beans, and what I did here was around the applique, I have just stitched around the applique blocks, but then I've cross-hatched in the background, and I love to do that. I love to cross-hatch behind the applique because it really makes the applique pop forward. One thing to think about when you're quilting is anything that you quilt recedes, and anything that you don't quilt will pop to the forward. So if you've done a lot of work with applique, it's nice to quilt the background fabric and not quilt on top of the applique, and then that will mean that it will become the dominant part of the block. But the rest of it, I've just sort of little cross hatches in areas. Some blocks I've echo quilted. Around the hexagons, I've gone around each hexagon. Then in the border, I've done wavy echoes of the vine. So I've really just used the quilt blocks as my inspiration also in this one. But you can get as ornate as you like with your quilting designs. And so this is Pick a Petal. And if I can just get the border there. I love to quilt and embellish at the same time. So what I've done here, just in a variety of thread colours, I've picked out and quilted different designs. So sometimes I'll just do little short runs, different length rows of just straight stitching. I have echo stitched around all my applique just to make that stand forward, but then I've used lots of other shapes to quilt into here. So little boxes, little square boxes, you can see there. Here I've done quilted like little flying bugs. I love these. They're just two lazy daisy stitches with a French knot right at the base, just to so it represents like a little bug. But you can do triangles, or here's some little triangles that I've quilted here. I've embroidered a butterfly, but then I've hand quilted the flight path of the butterfly. And somewhere in here there will be some little crosses and things. I'll see if I can find them. There they are there. So I love to quilt with these little crosses and just fill in the background behind all my applique. So while that looks like embroidery, I've actually used it technically as a quilting stitch, because every inch or so I will make sure that one stitch goes all the way through to all three layers, but the rest of the time I'll just be travelling between stitches in my batting and moving on, and that way it keeps the back of the quilt neat and tidy as well. So they're just some fun ideas. The more you get into hand quilting, the more things you'll think about stitching. So thanks everybody for watching. Really lovely that you joined me.